Thank you for joining us this evening. You are now attending the webinar entitled Creating Culturally Responsive Classrooms and Equity Mindsets. Our leader for this session is Dr. Nicole Clement, Director of the University Honors Program at Johnson C. Smith University. I'd also like to acknowledge tonight's TAs, Samora, Sobukwe, who's at the Leadership Preparatory Academy at Stonecrest, Georgia. And we also have Zoe Holl, who's at the Ethel Walker School in Simsbury, Connecticut. Both of them are members of that outstanding teacher advisory council that I told you about a few moments ago. So they will be active in the chat, sharing thoughts and resources and asking questions. Dr. Leslie Clement is the director of the Johnson C. Smith University Honors Program, where she is responsible for providing exemplary institutional leadership of UHP, which supports the recruitment, development, and retention of the university's highest achieving students. She is also a par excellence assistant professor and co-director of the Center for Languages, Rhetoric, and Cultures at Johnson C. Smith University. She is an interdisciplinarian who holds a PhD in English with concentrations in composition and teaching English to speakers of other languages, a graduate certificate in Africana Studies, and both her master's and bachelor's degrees in Spanish. As a seasoned educator who is credentialed to teach within 4 disciplines, she has been teaching since 1999 and has served as a university licensure supervisor for world languages and TESL pre-service teachers in North Carolina. She is HBCU educated, a proud Spelman alumna, and has served as an HBCU educator since 2005. She is also the recipient of several summer residency fellows from including the National Humanities Center, UNCF Mellon Faculty Summer Residency, and as I mentioned before, the Johnson C. Smith University Par Excellence Teaching Award, the university's most prestigious honor and teaching. To our network of teachers, both nationally and internationally, and without further ado, I present to you our scholar, our speaker, and leader, and friend of NHC education, Dr. Leslie Clement. Leslie, we are honored to have you with us tonight, and we look forward to hearing your talk.
Good evening, everyone. I hope that you can hear the excitement in my voice. First, I'd like to express my gratitude to Mike Williams and Raven Ferguson for affording me this opportunity to share what I've learned over the years through my participatory action research experiences in and outside of the classroom, and as a teacher, scholar, activist. I respect both of them as leaders, educators, and I've had the pleasure of getting to know them in 2023, as Mike explained, when I was an NHC Summer Fellow, and I work with them now on an innovative initiative that they're leading for HBCU faculty. Next, I'd like to thank the audience members for choosing to spend your Tuesday evening with me, and hopefully deeming this topic of culturally responsive teaching and equity-mindedness as important as practitioners. And I thank you for your willingness to listen to what I have to say, and hopefully it will enhance your repertoire of learning tools and strategies. So before I begin the presentation, I like to be upfront about my epistemological stance, my lens on how I view, understand, and how I move in this world. I'm a self-proclaimed equity warrior, so I teach, research, and view the world through an equity and empowerment lens with a racial justice focus. As a liberatory educator, I do not see myself as an expert, unlike many PhDs, but as a guide, I look at myself as a thought partner. I believe that knowledge is co-constructed. I critically analyze and ask students to do the same by asking them questions such as, how do you know what you know? Whose knowledge do you value and why? Who are the gatekeepers and the gatekeepers of knowledge? I want my students to be independent thinkers, so I encourage student agency. I want to hear their voice, their opinions, their positions. I want students to be the leaders of their own learning. I want them to learn, unlearn, relearn, and challenge things that they have taught. Okay, so now that you know about my teaching philosophy, let's get into it. There's 10 overarching questions that this webinar will address. First, what is culturally responsive teaching? 2, what does a culturally responsive classroom look like? 3, what is equity-mindedness? 4, how can educators practice equity-mindedness? 5, what are implicit biases and microaggressions, and how do they cause harm? 6, how can educators mitigate these microaggressions? Okay, I think I have 2 6s. So what are some research-based culture responsive teaching methods and frameworks? And how do I use my privileges to fight against inequitable discourses, practices, and policies? 8, what is an equity warrior, and how do I model and encourage my students to adopt an equity mindset? 9, what are some assessment tools that educators can use to enhance equity and belonging in the classroom? And then 2, hopefully I'll share some good resources that you can use. So I've listed the objectives and expected outcomes of this webinar, but 3 are key for me tonight. Reimagine teaching and learning by going beyond traditional classroom and textbooks to engage in dynamic, diasporic bodies of knowledge and landscapes. Analyze and transform pedagogical disequities by examining whose histories, heritages, experiences, and ways of knowing are valued and included in the course curricula. 3, I hope that teachers will exercise agency after leaving this webinar to foster equity consciousness in their classrooms by exposing social and historical exclusionary practices that shape real lives. Okay, so I've been talking a lot, so I want to do a pause and do an audience check-in by asking you to answer a question, and I want you all to be honest. So if you look on the question on our slide, do you consider yourself a culturally responsive and equity-minded educator? Why and why not? Okay, so I want you to answer this in the chat, but before you respond, I want you to consider the courses that you teach along with the course standards and answer one of the questions that I propose here on the slide. Okay, so just choose one. Okay, as you do that, I'm going to read the question. Okay, when you think about your courses, whose stories do you tell? Who do you include in your curricular outline? Whose stories do you not tell? Who's excluded? Whose histories, languages, and cultures does the curriculum that you use in your context value, brush over, and or exclude? So who do you privilege? Who's underprivileged? Do you think to favor students who look, act, and share similar beliefs as you? Okay, so think about your biases. Do you believe that harsher discipline practices and policies are disproportionately used to punish students of color at your school? So these are all questions I want you to reflect on honestly about your current teaching context. So we'll take about a couple of minutes. I want you to post those in the chat. A lot of times, this exercise is important to me because a lot of times we think that we are culture responsive and we think that we're equity minded, but we all have to be reflective and introspective and look at who we are teaching about, because we all have biases and we all have things that we're passionate to teach. Okay, so I want you to be honest in answering these questions. Okay, so I'll take a couple of minutes just to answer those. Now I want you all to compare your answers, really be reflective on your practices, your teaching practices. This is no judgment zone. We're all safe spaces. We're all teachers. We've all made mistakes. We all have learned from our mistakes. We're still learning. We're lifetime learners, and we always have opportunities to enhance. ourselves. Okay, so as you interact with each other and you look at each other's responses, I want you to think about, do you resonate with some of these answers? What are things that you can look at in your own context, your own curriculum, that you want to change, or things that you haven't considered maybe before? Because sometimes we're just tired and we just teach the curriculum. But what I'm asking you tonight is, I want you to be conscious. I want you to be reflective. I want you to be introspective. So I'm not going to go over you all's answers, but I definitely want you all to interact. And I'm going to continue on because I want to unpack. We have a lot to discuss tonight. So I want to unpack the title of this webinar. So what we're going to do is first look at our first word, culturally responsive teaching. Okay, so we know that Dr. Geneva Gay, she's the one who coined this term. If you see on the screen, you can see her definition. Okay, so this term, she defines culturally responsive teaching as using the cultural knowledge, prior experiences, frames of reference, and performance styles of ethnically diverse students to make learning encounters more relevant to and effective for them. She identifies 6 key practices of CRT. So if you look at these practices on your screen, she says that we should have high expectations for all students, engage students' cultural knowledges, experiences, practices, and perspectives, bridge gaps between homeschool and practice and school practices, seek to educate the whole child, identify and leverage students' strengths to transform education, and critically questioning normative school practices, content, and assessments. Okay, so this is how we define culturally responsive teaching. So I want you to keep this in mind as you reflect back on your answers to the questions that I posed earlier. Okay, our next term we're going to look at is equity mindedness. But before we get to that, let's talk about what culturally responsive teachers do. Culturally responsive teachers are culturally competent, and they value their students' intersectional identities. So that means that they are familiar with the different cultures in their classroom. Okay, they value them. They know that all students from El Salvador or from Brazil are not the same. They have intersectional identities, different things within those communities that make them unique. Culturally responsive teachers implement an inclusive curriculum that is made up of diverse resources. So teachers are not using their favorite books or their favorite texts, but they're looking at who's in their classroom, and they're making sure that the resources that they're using are resources reflective of all of the different cultures and identities within the classroom. 3, create respectful and learning environment. So we should not only be creating safe spaces, but also brave spaces for students to voice their opinions, discuss their lived experiences, and to even challenge us. 3, use a variety of teaching methods and instructional strategies. So we have to differentiate our instruction. Not everyone is going to listen to a lecture. Not everyone wants to watch a movie or a video. Okay, so everyone is not an independent learner. Some people work together collectively. So we have to make sure that we know our students and that we are differentiating our instruction to meet their needs, because the goal is for all students to be successful, and we have to meet them where they are. 4, encourage student agency. I talked about this earlier as part of my philosophy. And this is hard a lot of times, especially for teachers. We want to be in control. We want to tell students how and to respond and what to do and how to write. Okay, but we want them to have agency. We want to empower them and allow them to express their own opinions. 5, reflect on your own biases and practices to foster a more inclusive environment. Okay, so this is a time when I asked you earlier to be reflective. We all have biases and we all have to be reflective on them so that we can change our practices that may be disenfranchising some of our students. Okay, so the next term we have is equity mindedness. So this seminar is creating culturally responsive classrooms and equity mindedness. Okay, so equity mindedness, Estella Bensimon coined the concept of equity mindedness to describe the cognitive schema that administrators, faculty, and staff need to develop to address racial inequities on their campus. Equity mindedness refers to individuals having the knowledge to be conscious of race, being aware that racialized patterns are embedded in the university policies, practices, and norms. They use data to aggregate by race and ethnicity to identify racial equity gaps in their practice and take responsibility for changing policy practices and norms that sustain racial inequities. According to Bensimon, there are at least 5 equity-minded attributes. The first one, you have to understand accountability and the critical dimensions of equality. The second one, reframe race-based inequities as a problem of practice and view their elimination as an individual and collective responsibility. So look at how you can fight inequities and how you can work with others to do so as well. Okay, 3, encourage critical race consciousness. And 4, reflect on the organizational practices and aim to make them more culturally relevant, strategically navigate resistance to equity efforts, and aim to build buy-in among all colleagues. So this definition I took on the Center of Urban Education on their site. They have a lot of great resources if you want to look on their website to learn more about equity mindedness, and they also have some tools that you can use to help you reflect on your own practices. Okay, so how do we do this? First, we have to what? We have to check our privileges. We have to acknowledge that we all have different privileges, and some of them are unearned. We were born with them. We were born into certain classes of families. We have education, different education levels. We have different races, ethnicities that are favored in our society. So we have to recognize our biases and implicit biases, and we have to check our privileges. So we can, even though we have these biases, we can make a conscious choice to retrain our minds, okay? But we have to first acknowledge them, and we have to work towards retraining our minds. Okay, so implicit bias, I'm sure a lot of you have heard this term, but implicit bias runs contrary to our stated beliefs. Okay, so we can say that we believe in equity and truly believe it, but then unintentionally behave in ways that are biased and discriminatory. So also we have microaggressions. For example, when you ask someone where they're from, if they look like they're from another country, and then when they tell you that they're from Charlotte, North Carolina, you say, but no, where are your parents from? That's a microaggression. And how do these microaggressions cause harm to students? Okay, so there is a great little video. I'm not going to show it right now because I want to get through. But it talks about how microaggressions are like mosquito bites. Some of you may have seen it. It's very funny. So even though a mosquito is so small and it seems so harmless, if any of you have had mosquito bites, they can last for weeks of you scratching them, itching them, and even getting infected. Okay, so think about that when you say, I'm not racist because I have friends who are Latino, friends who are Black. Okay, or you make statements about, oh, you speak so well for being a Latina. Okay, so these are things that I want you to be conscious of. And you may not think that these are harmful things, but they do cause harm in students. Okay, so maybe we can watch, it's only about a minute or so. We can watch the video so you can see, because it shows, it's a great depiction of, great comparison of microaggressions to mosquitoes.
And Dr. Clement, yeah, we are having difficulty redirecting, so I dropped the link in the YouTube link in the audience chat. So I'll drop it in again for all the attendees, and so they should be able to review it that way. Otherwise, we can move on. Okay.
Okay, I apologize. So it's only a minute, but it's a great visual of what microaggressions are like and the harm that they cause. So if you have a chance, you can watch that a little later on. Okay, so what are microaggressions? Better yet, how can we mitigate these microaggressions? Okay, so Stu says that microaggressions, these are words or deeds that validate target experiences, what we should do in order to mitigate aggressions is use micro-interventions. Okay, so these micro-interventions are words or deeds that validate the target's experiences, affirm their racial identity, and offers encouragement, support, and reassurance to understand that they are not alone. So what does this do? It validates students' feelings and experiences. It expresses your willingness to help them come up with strategies for addressing how they feel. So these micro-insults, micro-assaults, micro-invalidations. Okay, so you recognize them, you help them work through them, because even though they're small, like mosquitoes, they have lasting effects. Dr. Geneva Gay found in her research that non-white students particularly respond positively to teachers who care, value their culture, identities, and who hold them accountable for their work. So this is why it's important to mitigate these microaggressions. So over the next 3 slides, I'm going to discuss 3 frameworks and models that align with and enforce cultural responsiveness and equity-mindedness. So the first one is an intersectionality lens or framework. So this term was coined by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, who's a legal scholar. And by using this lens, we can look at all of the ways that identities intersect with race. So she initially started by saying that Black people can be oppressed, not just by the color of their skin, but also by their gender. So the experiences of Black women and Black men are going to be differently. So intersectionality is a lens through which you can see where power comes and collides, where it interlocks and it intersects. It's not simply that there is one problem, a race problem, or a gender problem, or class, or LGBTQ problem there. Many times the framework erases what happens to people who are subject to all of these things. So we have to look at their religion. You may be Black, but you may be of the majority religion. You may be Christian, or you may be Muslim, or you may be agnostic. Okay, then we have to look at immigration status, our disabilities, our abilities, sexuality, gender. So people of color can be oppressed in multiple ways, not just in one way. So this gives us a framework to kind of look at that, because oftentimes frameworks dismiss, overlook, they erase or centralize experiences, okay, who do not fit into these westernized, Eurocentric, heteronormative, able-bodied models of identity. So this is a great framework to use. So we have to look at students when we look at them intersectionally. We have to look at their intersectional identities. Not all students from one race are going to be the same. Okay, the next one is asset-based instruction. This is very important because it is grounded in what students can do rather than what they cannot do. So we're not looking at students from a deficit model. Okay, the areas of weakness. We're focusing on their strengths. We're affirming their cultures. We're drawing on students' interests and prior knowledge. And we're educating them to create, we're becoming educated to create student-centered classrooms. Okay, so if you look in this picture, this is a picture of myself and a former student of mine who was documented. She has DACA. She graduated. This is us presenting in her middle school and informing people about what it means to be documented. And we also went to participated in a strike that happened, and this is in Charlotte, North Carolina. And she took me there. We led, and we took some students, and it was called A Day Without an Immigrant. So it was immigrants decided in Charlotte, some immigrants decided not to work that day. So they can see the importance of immigrants in the city and the community. Okay, so asset-based instruction. She brought this to me. She showed me, she was teaching me about the importance and also guiding me into her schools. And so we were received very well, and it was a great experience for both of us. Okay, this next model, this comes from Tara Yoso out of UCLA, and she talks about community cultural wealth. Okay, this model identifies 6 forms of cultural capital that students bring to the classroom. I used this when I was working on my dissertation. My research has to do with undocumented people, and specifically in students. And a lot of times, we don't think about what students bring to the classrooms, but they have lots of wealth of knowledge, lots of experiences that we often kind of overlook. And so Dr. Yoso uses this framework to index that students bring 6 types of cultural capital: aspirational, linguistic, familial, social, navigational, and resistance. So this is also another framework or model to use when we're talking about asset-based teaching. Okay, the last slide is distinctions of equity. So Zaretta Hammond, some of you may know, who is the author of Cultural Responsive Teaching and the Brain, reminds us that there are distinctions of equity. So she created this chart that compares multicultural education, social justice education, culturally responsive education. So a lot of these, not that one model is better than the other, but they kind of work together. But she is more in favor of a culturally responsive because it's more action. How do we respond to things that are going on in our schools, outside of our schools, and how they're affecting our students? Okay, so if you look at the chart, you'll see these different distinctions. Okay, so it's important to distinguish between 3 key areas, as she says, when engaged in equity work. We often confuse their particular purposes, and as a result, we use them interchangeably. But if you look at them closely, you see that some focus on different things. Okay, and so we're going to talk a little bit more about the culturally responsive education. Okay, so research shows that it's important for students to see themselves in the curriculum. And this is part of the culturally responsive classrooms. Okay, so we should be having text, images that reflect our student population. Okay, so we have to be conscious of every decision that we make in our classroom because we all want to see ourselves in the content that we're learning. Okay, so this is a picture of a student that I took to my alma mater, and we presented on teacher allies, and we worked together on trying to create more equitable spaces for undocumented students in the university area. Okay, so the next slide that I have here is how do I use my privileges to fight these inequities? Okay, so some of the things that I've done in the past, I have presented at academic conferences. I've also presented with my students at different local universities and as well as local high schools. I also served on different equity boards, okay, and different group organizations. So you can see some of the pictures of conferences. I worked with professors at UNC Charlotte. We presented at AERA. Students, we presented at different universities like Davidson College. And then we have some at the local high schools below. Okay, so earlier in the presentation, I said that I am a self-proclaimed equity warrior. Okay, so what does that mean? What does it mean to be an equity warrior? It means to create equity agendas, networks, pipelines of change agents who work together collectively to transform inequitable spaces, practices, and policies that exclude, disempower, and or disenfranchise specific individuals and or communities. So if you see in the picture to the left, this is a picture of some students, John C. Smith students who I took to a SALA conference, and we went to, these are some of the books that were banned. A lot of them were written by Black authors. So we participated in a banned book readout where we read some of these books out loud in the park in Jacksonville, Florida. The picture on the right are some workshops that we conducted. I'm on the right, and two of my students, one who have all graduated, one who is of Mexican descent, and the other who's Korean, who are both recipients of DACA. And so we went and they told about their experiences of being documented and how that other students and other faculty can help documented students and undocumented students, because not everyone who is undocumented is eligible for DACA. Okay, so what does it mean to be an equity warrior? First thing you have to do is seek out opportunities to work with other educators who are equity-minded practitioners. So you want to seek out like-minded people. So you see in the picture, this is a picture of my colleague from Johnson C. Smith, who's actually a computer scientist, and another colleague of mine who's at North Carolina Central in Durham. So we received a grant for the National Humanities Center to create a course, African Diaspora and Responsible AI Practitioners. We're also, we are part of the second cohort of Responsible AI Practitioners. And so we received a grant to create a class that's going to help students think about AI in different ways and how it affects communities of color. Okay, second, learn more about issues that affect your students' lives and support them in taking agency to combat them. So I co-created an organization, Undocumented Allies of North Carolina, with students who are documented. And so after we created this group, we decided that a lot of people were misinformed about what it means to be undocumented and how you become undocumented. A lot of students will use words like illegal, and they don't have their papers, but they really didn't know what that means and how it affected the lives of these people and their families. And so there's over 11.2 million undocumented people in the country. And so we went around, we would say we would go on tour, and we would go to different local schools and universities, and we would talk about what it means to be undocumented and how you can be an ally. And a lot of people didn't know that the majority of undocumented people who come into the country come in legally on a visa, but they overstay and that they fall out of status. So we talked a lot about that and how undocumented people contribute to taxes within the country. So a lot of people say they're taking our jobs, they're not paying taxes, but everything that they do, taxes are withdrawn, especially Social Security. So that is taken out of their checks, even though they will never benefit from Social Security or receive Social Security benefits. So they're actually contributing to our society. So we talked about a lot of misinformation. Okay, the third one, contribute to academic research and that counters essentialized or biased dominant discourses. So a lot of things that we read and a lot of the research is usually written by the majority about the minoritized populations. So we want to get in there and encourage our students to tell their stories. We want to tell counter stories and counter narratives of these dominant discourses that are essentializing certain populations. So in these two pictures, I have one where presented with my student and also a colleague. Next, center students' lived experiences by allowing them to share their realities, point them out as collaborators and knowledge constructors when you share what you learn for them. So just like we quote scholars, we need to quote our students. We need to look at them as collaborators and knowledge constructors because we learn a lot from them, their lived experiences. And so we need to make sure that we are giving them the credit for this. So these are some pictures of when we went on tour. And this is a picture on the left of different teachers in Charlotte, North Carolina. In the middle, these are students from West Meck High School. And so during this time, we actually started this organization, Undocumented Allies. We didn't have a budget. It was basically my money, the students' money, and we put it together. And what happened was there was a student who was a high school student who was going to his bus stop, and he was detained. They were having a lot of ICE raids during this time in Charlotte, North Carolina. And he was at the bus stop, and he was detained, and he was taken to a detention center in Georgia. His family didn't know. His friends didn't know. He didn't come home that night. And so there was a big row of the community to fight for him to get him out of the detention center. And if you know anything about immigration, it's very difficult to get someone out of a detention center unless you have a very unless you have a lot of money and a lawyer who can fight for them to come out. But with the community, some of the organizations in Charlotte were able to fight to get him out. So students talked about how it felt. They didn't realize what it really meant to be undocumented and how his life just changed in one day. And so to the right, this is me. Also, a lot of times when we think of undocumented communities, we think of only Latino communities. And so this is me talking with and as a panelist for people of Asian descent who are undocumented in the country. So we have to also look at the diversity. Okay, so earlier I said we have to be willing to tell counter narratives. So I have an ongoing project where I talk about African diasporic populations, and I collect narratives and stories of people of African descent, because often Black communities or Blackness is essentialized. And so like earlier, we have to use this intersectionality framework. So I use these stories as counter stories to go against this kind of the way that dominant discourse is essentialized, and they kind of homogenize Black people into one group. So I've talked a lot. I don't know if we have any questions. Mike, if you have any questions, if you see any questions in the chat. As you can see, I'm very passionate about this, so you have to stop me.
No, it's all good. We do. We appreciate that. We had a question. It was actually a comment, but we'll frame it as a question as well. Addie mentioned that she would like to learn about her students' individual cultures, but she's afraid that doing so would be to ask them to perform uncompensated emotional labor and or come off as disingenuous or performative. What recommendations do you have for her when she is in that situation where she wants to have these deep dives and these deeper conversations with her students about their cultures, but at the same time, she does not want to come across as being disingenuous?
That's a great question because I think a lot of times communities, especially students, are asked to speak for their entire community. So Black students are asked to speak for the Black community, who they do not represent, Latino students, and so on. So I think the best approach is to try to get to know her as a person and to try to form a personal relationship with her. And then by doing that, that automatically she's going to open out and you're going to learn more about her culture. Okay, and it's not a good practice. I know we have these cultural days. We can have them, but let students who volunteer, who want to come out and talk to the class about their cultures and different practices that they have. But I think that's very important that you ask that question because a lot of students do often feel that they have to answer these questions and that they represent the entire community, and they do not. So I think I would say try to get to know the student more on a personal level, ask them how they're doing, ask them about what they did the weekend, and then those are ways of naturally, authentically learning about what they like, what they do, and without making assumptions or seeming over aggressive or intrusive. But that's a great question.
Good deal. Good deal. We had a question pretty early on from Ryan, and his question was: do you align yourself with the critical pedagogy of Paulo Freire in terms of your approach?
Yes, absolutely. So Paulo Freire is definitely one of the scholars who I read in college, who I fell in love with, who changed my mindset because I was not always as passionate as I am, and I didn't even recognize the banking system that Paulo Freire talks about. I was one of those students who was just regurgitating, just memorizing everything that my teachers told me and regurgitating it. I never was a critical thinker. I just wanted to get an A on the test, and I believed what they told me because growing up, a lot of times, we believed that teachers who had degrees or elders, they were knowledgeable and they had the wisdom, and we weren't questioning it. And so once I read Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, it definitely gave me a better outlook on not just I see the world, but how I reflect on myself, especially as an educator and my students' experiences in the classroom, and making sure that they're reflected in the curriculum. And sorry, Ryan, about taking so long to answer your question. I get passionate and I keep going. But I hope to answer your question.
That was a great question. Thank you. And last question for now, and we'll continue on, and we'll reserve some time at the end for questions. How do we introduce this concept in schools that may be hostile to the idea of equity mindedness or recognizing all cultures? What are approaches you recommend? And I know that's difficult terrain,
Yes, it's very difficult terrain, and it's easy for me to say, especially as a higher educator, where we have more freedom in our spaces, especially at HBCUs. So these are topics that we discuss frequently and without reservation. And so being in schools, and I'll just say, I want to give you an example of this was actually this year. We had an incident at the high school that I graduated from in Charlotte, where an educator for Black History Month decorated her door. You may have read about this. And she it was like she recreated this Sears Roebuck store. And it had a door, it said whites only and colored. And so this caused a big upheaval, not just within the school, which is predominantly Black, but also in the community. And people just read the signs without even really knowing what the context was and what they were doing. And they said this wasn't a part of the curriculum. It was creating separateness in the classroom. And so she had to take it down. And they also had to go through training for weeks on what is appropriate and following the North Carolina course standards. So this is not an easy task that I'm asking you to do. But I think that if you're strategic and if you are passionate about it, you can find ways to incorporate a variety of resources into the classroom and make sure that it's tied to the curriculum. Okay, so I think that it is very difficult, especially right now when we have so many, it's a political issue. But I think that our students are worth taking those risks. And I think that we have to create these brave and safe spaces, because if not, we can go back into times where things are going to be even more segregated and even more uncomfortable if we don't address these issues. So I hope
Good deal.
that
Yeah, that was great. Thank you so much to everyone. Continue to put your questions in the Q&A chat box. We're going to move ahead. We still have another maybe 20 minutes or so. So yeah, we're fine. So continue on. Okay. Thank you so much, Leslie.
Okay, thank you. And so also, Mike, please stop me because I can talk. These are things that I live. This is my livelihood, similar to you. So these are things I can talk about for days and that I enjoy talking about. So I want to make sure that you all are, get your questions in, your comments in, and I appreciate the engagement. So moving on so we talked about what it means to be culturally responsive, what it means to be equity-minded. I shared some of the ways that I model it. So we can't just come and tell students to be equity-minded. We have to model these behaviors. And we also have to do checks on ourselves. We have to use different tools to assess, are we being culturally responsive? Are we being equity-minded? The late Black feminist and critical educator, Audre Lorde, reminds us, we cannot use the master's tools to dismantle the master's house. What does that mean? That means that we can't use these same books, the same curriculum that oppressed us, okay, and that created these different systems in order to fix them. We have to recreate, we have to create new tools, and we have to do that collaboratively, okay, and we have to be honest, and we have to be brave, and sometimes we have to be uncomfortable. So what I ask is that you look at, or what I want to offer are some different assessment tools when you're reflecting on your teacher practices. And when you see things that you do, don't be so harsh on yourself. We all do them. We all have students who we tend to favor more. And they're usually students who are like us. It's not necessarily race, but students, for example, who are passionate, who want to go out and challenge things. Those are students who I attract, and those are students who I favor. Okay, so I have to be conscious that I'm making sure that I am socializing with all of my students and learning about them. Also, the first thing we can start with is our syllabus. So there's a great assessment tool. It's a syllabus review guide. It's on USC's website, the Urban Education. They have a lot of great resources that I suggest that you go and check out. But the syllabus review guide, it asks you, you take your syllabi and you're going to use it, and it forces you to critically review it and to assess it. I taught a seminar for teachers in Charlotte at UNC Charlotte through the CTI Institute, and we had teachers who we reviewed our syllabi. And some of them were surprised because they felt that they were very equity-minded, and they were very intentional about trying to include different texts from different cultures. But we can all look at different cultures, but we may miss students who have disabilities. So I realized that's one thing that I had to work on in my curriculum, is making sure that I had needs and tools for students with disabilities, and that I was letting them talk as well or share their thoughts. I have a student who was nonverbal, who we ended up using tools where he can express himself, where he sent me things ahead of time and I would read them out. I had students with visual impairments where we would meet online, different ways, different tools they showed me that I was unfamiliar with. And so when we talk about equity, we're not just looking at race, we're not just looking at gender, we're also looking at communities who have disabilities. And I think that's a community that a lot of us, unless we're trained in that area, we often forget about. Okay, so this tool asks you to assess your syllabi, okay, through this equity empowerment lens. And is the curriculum written for the dominant people in my classroom, or is it written for all of the students? Okay, so these are different things that we have to be honest about as teachers and practitioners if we want to be equity-minded and we want all of our students to feel like they belong in the classroom. Okay, another assessment tool is that we can use to evaluate our equity-mindedness is this group is they're called the Due East Equity Collaborative. It's an educational consultant group. They have a lot of great tools as well. And one is the CRCT. This is a self-assessment and reflective tool, and it focuses on 4 components. Okay, so it asks teachers to recognize the educational impact of cultural diversity, address demographic inequities and achievement. It shows you how to build relationships across cultural differences and adopt curriculum to reflect cultural diversity. So it gives you great resources. It asks you a lot of questions that you have to respond to. And based on your responses, it gives you suggestions. Okay, also, video where we have students who looked at the different dolls and they would ask them questions. What doll was prettiest? And they will always choose the lighter doll. Which doll was the smartest? It was always the lighter. So sometimes we have these pictures in our head, these stereotypes of different groups of people, and that we have to be conscious of, and we have to retrain our minds to not think of a certain community or person in such a way. And so this is it for the people who are really serious in changing their mindsets and being proactive and being equity-minded and wanting to really address issues that or practices that they're unconsciously perpetuating in the classroom. So this is the first thing that you can do as someone, if you're new and you're recognizing and saying, okay, I see some of the questions, I see what Leslie says about some of the biases, and I am guilty of these things. Okay, so what do you have to do? You have to be culturally humble. Cultural humility, what does that mean? A culturally humble educator or student has knowledge and awareness of their own possible biases and attempt a non-judgmental stance. Okay, so you have to be conscious first. You have to admit it. You have to be committed to lifelong reflection. Okay, so this is not something that's just going to change overnight. Okay, so usually we go and we live in these bubbles. So we go to certain communities where people who look like us. Okay, we have to get out of that. We have to go to communities of people that don't look like us. And that's how we learn. And that's how we change our minds about things that we've been taught or maybe experiences that we have. and we have to readdress these issues. Okay, so not just be culturally competent, but we have to be culturally humble. Okay, so these are some. I know I'm finishing a little early. I'm surprised. I usually have so much information, but there's several books on how to create culture responsive and equity-minded classrooms. These are a couple of the books that I have listed. Okay, also these are some of the references. But what I would like to do, since we have a little bit of time, I'm not sure if I put a link in there, to kind of go back and talk about some of the things that I did as an educator that really bridged my understanding, and it bridged relationships with my students that I didn't have before. So a lot of times students come to class, we know how they act and they behave. Usually we respond to the students who are quiet or who are the ones who are misbehaving, okay? But a lot of times other students get left out. And so a lot of times we don't know what is going on in their homes. And so this would allow me to learn more about how these dominant discourses were shaping their lives, okay, and how their lives could just change, especially undocumented students, in just one day. And so some of the things that I do also as a critical educator and equity-minded, every space that I go into, I'm looking for ways I'm looking for the gaps, ways that other people can benefit from different tools. In fact, that's how I met, that's how I was invited to the National Humanities Center, and the conversations that we had, and asked to come here tonight. Because as a fellow that summer, I saw that a lot of HBCUs weren't represented in the National Humanities Center. And we have expert scholars, but on a larger scale, a lot of times people want those scholars from those larger universities, those R1 universities. And so we don't always fit that model. But we do a lot of things, and we have innovative pedagogies, and we have a lot of research and experts in our fields who are often not quoted, not invited into different spaces because we are HBCUs. And so, that's just what I do. It's a lifestyle. So once you start doing it, and once you adopt this mindset, you really want everyone to feel like they belong. And you want everyone to have resources that others don't have. So if we go back and look at this story. So this is one of my students I wanted to tell you who she was so brave. She actually self-deported after about 2 years because she had so much anxiety. She had thoughts of suicide because she was constantly in fear of deportation. And so she dealt with a lot, and it kind of makes me emotional when I think about it. But she eventually decided to self-deport, and she actually is back in Mexico. And if you know anything about deportation, when you self-deport, usually it takes at least 10 years before you can even apply again to come back into the country. So it created this bond and this understanding and this compassion, maybe that I didn't have before, and understanding. And it helped me to really to get to know my students better and to find out what's going on not only in their household or at home, or issues that are happening politically that are shaping their lives. And so as I've done that, I've learned so much. I've engaged in so many great projects, and we're able to create a lot of pipelines and networks of students who want to be change agents, and with scholars and activists who are change agents. So this is not just something for our classroom, but this is enriching your life, and it's also enriching making you conscious of your attitudes, your choices, and how you treat people just in general. So I think this is definitely something that we want to create a type of culture in our schools, especially at a time right now where there's so much tension politically, racially, so many nativist attitudes. And we have to be the ones to have these courageous conversations. Okay, so I'm going to go back towards the end. I just wanted to reflect on that because I think I went through pretty quickly to make sure I have enough time for the webinar. But does anybody have any questions?
Hey, Leslie, I have a question, and this is going to take us back to the slides on capitalizing on community cultural wealth, where you talked about the 6 different types of capital. I was wondering if you could speak a little more to that. And I think that is so important, particularly as it relates to better understanding our students. And so, yeah, you mentioned aspirational, linguistic, familiar, social, navigational, and resistant capital. I was wondering if you could speak a little more to that. I think that's so important.
It really is. Thank you. And I kind of went over it pretty quickly. But Dr. Yoso, she is a scholar who works with undocumented people. And she just, as she was working with students, she looked at and she examined whose culture had capital. She specifically was looking at undocumented students in California and at her university. And so she said that once interviewing, she had over 500 students who she interviewed over the years. And she realized that a lot of educators believe that students come in as these blank slates, and like they don't have any knowledge, and we have to pour the knowledge into them. And so she said that no, once she examined the data and she looked at the different students who were coming in the classroom, that these students bring a lot of cultural capital that we often overlook. And so one of them, if we look at, if we start from the bottom, the resistant capital. Okay, so our students have had to deal with a lot of issues that are, especially communities of color. And so they are naturally have this resistance within them, and they naturally have to have this kind of counter narrative of different stories. And so they're able to get through a lot of difficult situations because they have this natural resistance capital within them. Okay, so if we go up to some of the next one, if we look at the aspirational capital, so I'm sorry, I skipped from 6 to 1. So this is the ability to maintain hopes and dreams, especially so if we're looking at our undocumented students who have these real barriers in their lives. And so they have this aspirational capital. Despite being undocumented, they still aspire and have their own dreams of going to college, of having careers, because we know there is no pathway to citizenship. So they bring this aspirational capital. The familial capital refers to the socialization and how their families have influence in them, and the different community networks that they have, and that have different knowledge and different leaders who they can draw from and bring in this wisdom, their values, and stories. Okay, and then next we have the social capital. So the social capital emphasizes how students utilize certain contexts to gain access to college, okay, how they stay connected with their communities, okay, how they engage with community-based organizations, okay, and the different support systems that they have. Okay, and we have the linguistic capital. So a lot of times we look at students that they have accents as a deficit. But when I hear a student who has an accent, I know that they speak more than one language and that they are able to communicate within different communities. And so they're able to tell stories and to gather stories and get details from other communities who don't speak English and bring that type of knowledge into the classroom. And then I think I went over most of them. Okay, any questions about any of those? So these are just capital. So we're looking at them, looking at students of what they bring. And so I think this, if you look at the model a little bit closer, you'll see some other examples of these 6 different types of capital. Okay, are there any other questions?
Yeah, so that was great. Thank you so much for sharing. Oh, no, I don't want to interrupt you.
Oh, no, I was just going to go over, just to kind of look over these different frameworks that I hope that you all, if you're not familiar with, that you would definitely look into, especially the intersectionality framework and lens. Okay, this is important because it shows not only our different identities, how they privilege us, but some of them underprivilege us as well, and how we're privileged and underprivileged in different ways, and a lot of ways that we don't think about. So we usually tend to focus on gender, sexuality, ethnicity, but we forget about religion. We forget about disabilities. We forget about immigration status. Okay, so this is a great framework to use, especially when you're analyzing different topics and how people within the community experience these type of oppressions. Okay, also asset-based instruction. So instead of looking at students when they come into the classroom, what they don't have, which is a deficit model, I want you to try to look at what do they bring? Where can I start with them? What do they add to, what kind of value do they add? And when you recognize that and you ask students to speak out on that, they're going to be more engaged into your classroom. They're going to feel like you care about them, especially communities of color. Okay, so they are very, like Dr. Geneva Gay said, they're very receptive when they think that the teacher likes them or the teacher is interested and values their culture. Okay, so we want to look at students, their experiences that they bring as assets. These aren't just experiences, but these are things a lot of times that we don't know about. And they have these different skills. So if we look at them from this standpoint, we can focus on their strengths. So this is a strength-based model. Okay, and I just went over the culture capital and then the culture responsive education. Okay, and equity mindedness. So when we talked about equity mindedness, so it goes beyond just saying or believing that students should have the same things, but what are you doing as a practitioner? What are you doing individually? What are you doing collectively in a positive sense in order to work towards fighting against these inequities that exist? Okay, so and being aware of these policy and practices and not just turning a blind eye when you see these things happen, because a lot of times we have so much on our plate already. But this is important that we model this. So we're not going to go and have a lesson plan on equity mindedness or a lesson plan on culturally responsive teaching. This should be modeled every day throughout your class. Show how you value your students. Show how you value what they bring to the classroom, that you care about them, that you understand the different things that they go through and how they shape their lives and experiences, that you're including books and images that look like them. Okay, so these are very important strategies. Okay, and again, these are strategies, but we have to change our mindsets, because we can say that we're applying these different strategies and these tools, but if we are not changing our mindsets, we're still unconsciously or consciously perpetuating some of these practices that disenfranchise our students.
Absolutely. Awesome, awesome, awesome. And as I'm looking through the chat, everyone is so appreciative, Leslie. Just thank you so much for leading us, for guiding us this evening, and really showing us, just exploring how we all, and I say we because I'm still an educator, but how we can cultivate culturally responsive classrooms. And there's so many ways that we can do it. But I think what's most importantly is you hit the nail on the head. You said it's modeling it. You know, there's the content approach, but actively putting it in practice. And just thank you for that. Thank you for just being so responsive to the questions. And special shout out to Zoe and Samora who are in the chat. I don't know if you noticed there, they were dropping links and they were very active tonight. So I appreciate this conversation. And for everyone who's here tonight, I believe I saw we had upwards of 800 or so who are actually in attendance tonight, which is definitely a new record, I will say. But thank you all for joining us. And I see the references. I'm going to stay on this page for a sec while I, give my final comments, because I know several of you are going to go back through this webinar. Of course, it'll be available on demand and in our archives. But please return, pause, and really go through all of the resources that were provided tonight. And actually, I have your gratitude page here. So if you I
didn't get to that, but I wanted to. Yeah, and this is important for me, especially as a culturally responsive practitioner. It's always to express gratitude, because you all didn't have to show up tonight. Mike, you didn't have to invite me tonight. And I like to thank my mentors, fellow equity warriors who are out there, my colleagues, because you all are actually doing the work. If you haven't done the work, you're committed to it. Being here tonight is the first step, and just saying either I'm doing the work, but I want to do more, or it's how can I change my attitude? I want students to feel like they belong. I want to have a more open attitude, and I want to model these behaviors, okay, not just talk about them. So I'm always expressing gratitude because I love diverse exchanges of knowledge, thought-provoking questions, and we are the educators, and we're always, even though I'm at the college level, I'm at HBCU, we all share experiences of being overworked, underpaid, but we do it because of the love of it, and we do it because of the love of our students. And so, we have similar experiences, and it's just different levels. And I really just want to give a shout out to all of you all who are doing the work daily. And it's difficult because we have so many different issues that we're dealing with in the classes today. But I just want to give you thanks for that, and I want to thank you for even just coming, participating, and being hopeful and becoming a better practitioner.
Absolutely. I agree 1,000%. So again, everyone, please continue to come back and support. And as I mentioned, this video will be available on demand. So please come back and check out the references page. Also check out all of the slides that are available here. And again, I'm looking through the chat, and it's great webinar. I love how you point out how we should model. We must model what we expect from our students. Thank you, Maria. And again, to all our new attendees tonight, it was awesome. And I'll close by just saying, if you would like to follow more, you all pretty much know this, but follow us on our social media channels, and just stay in touch and up to date on all that's going on at the National Humanities Center. We provide a bridge between the academic world and the working classroom. Your gift, no matter how modest, can open up a world of ideas for teachers and rekindle their enthusiasm for the subjects they teach by providing the knowledge and tools that they and their students need to make a difference. Interestingly enough, several of you have donated. As you all know, we are a private nonprofit institution, and we are devoted to exclusively to the humanities. I work in the education programs department, and we just enjoy serving and supporting you all. So next up, October the 3rd, the power and science of unlearning. The power and science of unlearning. We have Dolly Chu, who's a Jacob B. Melnick term professor and management and organizations at the in the management and organizations department at New York University. She will be here October 3rd, 2024 at 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. I look forward to seeing you, quote unquote, seeing you all there. I generally have a question as to when you will receive your certificates. There will be a final song that we will play as we close out. Once I close the room, then your certificates will auto-generate. So there's nothing else that you would need to do. Again, thanks to TAs tonight. Thanks to our first timers. Thanks to everyone who was active in the chat. Thank you, Ryan, Rebecca, Kylie, everyone who sent in questions throughout the evening. I look forward to seeing you again. Continue to have an awesome week. We appreciate you all. Take care.